welcome to episode 7 of CXCY, brought to you by our friends at ClueTrack. Today we are going to talk about the airline industry. And I know that brings all sorts of emotions out in people, some positive, some negative. We're going to cover it all here today. And I'm so excited to dig into the data with our ClueTrack analytics and figure out what's really going on in the airline industry and what is causing people to have a great or subpar experience. As always, we have an expert on the show, but not often do we get to bring a real and true friend of mine onto the show, which I am super excited about. I would like to welcome to the show Noam Alon. He is an airline captain with a U.S. airline, major U.S. airline. How you doing, Noam?
I'm doing great, Dan. How are you?
I am doing awesome. I'm so excited to talk to you in this format, which we haven't done before, but is pretty cool. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, like you mentioned, I'm a airline captain for a major U.S. airline. Been in the airline industry for coming up on 25 years. Flown a number of different airplanes, from commuter airplanes regionally to domestic, narrow body airplanes, wide body international flights. And right now, primarily, I fly domestic flights around the U.S. But I've also held a number of other roles over the years in operations, in customer and employee engagement, in human resources, a number of different aspects of the airline industry. So, yeah, glad to be here.
And that is exactly why we have you here, because I know that you've seen so many different angles of the industry, from being in the plane, flying the passengers, to being on the outside in management and seeing what's going on in terms of the decision-making process. So I think we're going to have a great time here talking about this industry. So let's get started. We looked at over 27,000 customer reviews from 12 top airlines worldwide. We wanted to make sure that we got a nice collection of both US and international airlines. And we looked at the range from January to January 22 to 23. So keep that in mind just in case the timing of things may impact some of your answers. We looked at, again, a lot of different airlines. This is just simply a count of how many reviews were for each airline. And you can definitely see that you've got American, British Airways, Delta as some of the top ones. And then you start to get into some of the European, Middle Eastern airlines, Qatar Airways, Turkish, Emirates. And then we get into some Asian airlines at the end. So a nice collection. Again, as we're talking about the data, keep in mind that this is from people all over the world. Unfortunately, this is an industry in which a great portion of reviews that are written are on the negative side. We really try to highlight positivity here on this show, but this is kind of an interesting industry. And so we're going to dig into a little bit some of the things that might be causing people to have a more negative reaction after flying. And Noam, this is where we're going to start with a little pop quiz. Now, there's no wrong answer, so don't worry about getting this wrong, but we're just curious to see where your brain goes. So we have, in alphabetical order, 5 concerns that airline passengers have talked about in ratings and reviews. And those are customer service, flight cancellation, flight delay, routing and scheduling issues, and staff helpfulness. If you had to guess, what are the things that would rise to the top in terms of concerns that airline passengers have?
I would say flight cancellation, staff helpfulness, and customer service.
All right. And why does your head go there?
Well, staff helpfulness. So cancellation, you have the least amount of, it's the most disruptive. That's the thing that creates the most uncertainty. You know, I fly sometimes, well, I fly for work. You know, I've had the opportunity sometimes to just fly to go fly. And as a passenger, but most people are flying because they're trying to get someplace. So a cancellation means they're not getting to where they want to be. And so I can see that I think that would be a major concern. And in that situation, I would imagine that staff helpfulness, in other words, people feel like they need assistance, and if that's not available, I think people would feel that that's a major concern. And then lastly, we said customer service, and that's, I think, the just the kind of the broader environment of the airline travel for the vast majority of people is a stressful experience, from security to the whole, getting boarding and all of that. And so I think customer service is a key concern for people, I can imagine, because that's how people get help navigating through.
Yeah, I like those answers. I think in particular, when I think of a flight cancellation, I think of people missing big life events, and you can't replace that, right? So if you've missed a wedding or a funeral or the birth of a child or something like that, it doesn't matter how many apologies you get, you're never getting that moment back, and that's got to be highly emotional. And then I can tell you, as a frequent flyer, that certainly since the pandemic, customer service has been a problem because I think of staffing. And so the wait times have become a whole lot longer. I'm now used to calling up my airline and having them say, "We'll call you back in sometimes 2 hours," because that's how long the line is. So I think you're right, but let's see, because I like to keep this a mystery. So as it turns out, customer service is indeed the number one top concern of airline passengers. Interesting, flight delay comes before flight cancellation, which I agree with you, is a little bit difficult to reconcile, other than what you said at the beginning, which is the flight cancellation happens the least amount of time. So if we're talking about just number of reviews, maybe that does make sense.
Gotcha.
So as you look at this and you look at sort of, how these are related to each other, what's your instant reaction?
I think my instant reaction is that I was thinking about this in terms of people anticipating, but this is really more about people's reaction once something happens. And so the customer service, it makes sense. The customer service, in other words, when people need support and they're not getting it, and that if it's related to a flight delay or cancellation, it's because of the very things that you said. They're not making it to that life event or that whatever's on the other end of that travel. And when they need the support the most, if they're not getting it or they're not feeling like they're getting it, that makes sense that customer service would be the number one thing. And to your point, I think flight delays, they happen much more than flight cancellations. So it would make
That was
sense.
actually your point. I was just repeating it.
Oh, well, good point. But yeah, so it makes sense that flight delays would be ahead of flight cancellations. But that would be, again, people are there to get from A to B, and a delay disrupts that. It's much more frequent, so it makes sense that it would be higher. But the cancellation, I think a lot of delays are short enough that maybe they don't cause enough of a negative experience to warrant a negative review, and a cancellation, of course, would do that. So that's why they're kind of close.
Yeah.
That's my first reaction.
Another thing I think about when I look at this is that all of the ones below customer service probably end up involving customer service. So if I have a flight delay or a cancellation and I need to change my plans, I'm probably talking to customer service in order to get that to happen. So I think, had I thought of that earlier, I would have definitely put customer service number one. So I think it makes absolute sense. Yeah. All right, let's move on and see what else we learned from 27,000 reviews. We're going to dive into the top concerns that customers have had. So here is a deep dive into what are we talking about when we're saying that people are complaining about customer service. And it's really interesting because there's a couple different dynamics here. There is the inability to get to a supervisor. There's how long of a response time there is. And you can see some of the words. These are words that come directly from review. So you start to see kind of what's happening here. You've got on the upper left here, you've got sort of how people feel like they're being treated by a person, right? That they're not being heard, that they're being dismissive. On the upper right, it's about just the frustration of not being able to talk to a human, or it taking too long, et cetera. And I got to say, to be honest, I think you could take the airline business out of this. And this would be very similar for many industries that by the time, as a famous guy once said, I wish I said this, but I didn't. Customer service is what happens when customer experience breaks. If you don't want to have a customer service department, then just have a perfect customer experience and no one will ever have to call you. But of course, not particularly realistic. So Noam, as you look at these things, are you seeing what I'm seeing, that these are fairly generic and other than the missing the important events, which is something you and I said, that this could in theory appeal to any industry or apply to any industry?
Yeah, I absolutely. I can imagine almost any industry this being true. I think what happens in the airline industry that maybe adds a layer of intensity is people really they have very limited control, right? They're in an environment that they're not in frequently, in an industry that is highly controlled. And, for example, once you're on the airplane, if there's a delay, and you're airborne or you're in a holding pattern, like you don't have choices. Or if there's de-icing that happens to happen. So there are a lot of things that happen that are out of your control, where maybe in some other industries you might have a little bit more. But yeah, this seems very generic, and I definitely applies to, I think, any number of industries.
Yeah, I'm also wondering, and because you've been part of the operations side, I'm curious, if you have a plane that is delayed or canceled and you have 200, 300 passengers on that plane, I can't think of another industry in which that many people would all be needing customer service at the exact same moment. And maybe that's some of what, that there's these pressures that get put on the system that are not necessarily predictable, can happen at any time. And when they happen, it's not just one or two people that need help. It's hundreds of people.
Right.
Is that something that, I would think that would be unique to the airline industry?
I think it's certainly something that that we've, that's true. I could tell you a story, where it happened. So we were at a movie recently, and the fire. There was actually a fire, not in the theater we were in, but in the theater itself, or the broader theater. And so everybody had to get out. They had to evacuate the building, and then suddenly you've got, I don't know, several hundred people needing tickets. So it does happen in other industries, but it definitely happens in the airline industry frequently. And it's exactly what you said. What I could tell you in my experience, one of the things that we've always tried to do, and we've tried to get better over time, is when there are delays or cancellations, to the extent that we can move them, let people know early enough so that there are more choices available to them. That's one of the things we've tried to do to kind of de-stress that situation, to kind of take some of the pressure off that situation, because it's exactly what you said. And then in the airline industry, and I think this is probably true in others, we've tried to leverage technology. So for example, rather than being limited to the physical number of customer service agents available in a particular location, we now use chat and connections with customer service agents across our network, who might be sitting idle in one airport, but are available, and they can help you with the logistics of managing your travel. They don't have to physically be in the same location you're in, to try to spread that out and be able to improve the reaction time and try to address some of those things that you showed on that other slide.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. All right, we're going to jump into flight delay here. And I want to share with our viewers something that is new in this episode, is that we've got these deeper insights that are coming from each one of these areas. And the reason for that is a new piece of technology that ClueTrack has added to its services called Ask ClueTrack. And it is the underlying technology, something you've probably heard about. It's called ChatGPT. And so they have used ChatGPT to analyze these reviews in a way that has never been done before. And you can literally ask ClueTrack, so what are the key issues relating to flight delays? And the system spits this out. So as we look at these reasons, and then sort of the reasons are on the left, and then there's some specific detail on the right. What I wanted to ask you about, Noam, is how do you differentiate between a flight delay that maybe is the airline's fault because, a plane isn't
Mechanical
functioning
issue, right,
properly
right.
versus something that is weather related, which is really not the airline's fault? But let's face it, customers are still going to be mad at the airline, like you brought the snow. But how do you deal with that from the airline perspective? Do you deal with it differently?
I think what we found over the years, and what my experience has been, is the more transparent you are with people, and the more you keep people up to date with what's happening, the better the reaction. People understand that there are things that are in your control and things that are not. And as long as you're communicating and providing updates, sharing the information, even if sometimes it's, I don't know anything, I don't have enough information to give you, more detail. People appreciate that, and I could share examples of that, weather related or mechanical. I mean, they, things that are within our control and things that are not.
So, Noam, you are in a unique position as the captain of the plane of being able to communicate this to a plane full of passengers. So, as you think about making an announcement, how do you maybe communicate differently if it's a problem that is the airline's cause versus if it's something that's totally out of your control?
Yeah, I would say that, especially as it relates to weather, everybody's got, um, their own meteorological department on their phone, and so there's no point in trying to give more information than what everybody already knows, but to give it in a way that is transparent. So, for example, recently I had a flight from Chicago to New York. There was, bad visibility, which restricted arrival rates, and that's the thing that people maybe sometimes don't understand, is how the weather impacts the traffic flow. But in this particular case, so what our commitment is typically is to try to make updates every 15 minutes, even if there's not much of a change between those 15-minute updates. But and we've tried as an airline, and I know this is becoming more commonplace, but come out of the cockpit and be able to make updates in front of people so they could see. I think there's a level of honesty and authenticity that comes with being in front of people if you're on the airplane, come out of the cockpit, or if you're still at the gate, do that, make a PA at the podium next to the customer service agent, and basically explain, look, there's weather you could see on your phone, and here's how it affects airline operations, and therefore the delay is this, and here's what we expect the next update to be, and so on and so forth. And so there's a lot of kind of an explanation of, here's the weather that you're aware of, and here's how it affects the operation. On the flip side, it was a mechanical issue. Everybody was boarded. We pushed back, had a problem starting the engine. And, there's a fine line between sharing information that is honest, which of course you always want to do,
And scary.
and scaring people because, we work in a very safe industry. Things have a lot of redundancies, and a lot of times it's just one of the redundancies is not working, or there's an indication that needs to be checked out. And that's generally the level of information. We have it, I'll share, we have an indication in the cockpit. We need to have our maintenance department check it out. Here's what the maintenance department says. It's going to take this long. And then so far, give updates at regular intervals. That tends to be the right balance between keeping people informed and not scaring them, because, and what I always tell people, if I look at somebody, they look scared, but I would tell them, look, I'm not going to go. I'm the captain. I'm going with you. So I'm not going unless I think it's safe. And that tends to make people feel good, feel better.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I remember having a situation in which we were delayed on the ground in Chicago as well. And, the captain said something like, there's a delay and we're not sure how long it's going to take. And then like a half an hour went by and nobody heard anything. Right. And that's what gets people really, upset and going, because they're like, come on, where's the update? Even if the update is we don't have an update,
right? That
communication is so important. And I think it's so interesting that you said that, because when we go to the reasons why people are commenting about flight cancellation, and we ask ClueTrack to go use ChatGPT, what comes up at the top is cancellations with no explanation, right? It's not even that it was canceled. It was that there was no explanation that is the difficult part. And so I think this is a key takeaway for every industry, is that communication matters. And even when you have to give bad news, which we have to do a lot in a lot of different industries, we've got to be communicative about it. I remember during the pandemic, I was consulting with a company that sold, among other things, PPE, masks and gloves and all the things that everybody needed. And they had to allocate purchases to their customers because they did not have enough for everybody. And people were upset because they wanted more. And the way that we got through it was honest, consistent communication. And even some attempts at being and maybe even having a little fun with the communication, right? In the sense that, hey, we know this sucks, but we are doing the best that we can, and we are working day and night. I think people really appreciate it when you are just willing to be honest with them and tell them what's going on. I think it's also fascinating, though, to your point, that you just can't tell them everything that's going on. Otherwise, you're going to have one of those scenes from Airplane where, everybody's running in the aisles, right? You can't have that happen.
No.
All right, let's move on. I wanted to turn a little bit positive here for a minute and talk about how airlines can fix some of these. So what is it when people when they go through a flight cancellation or a delay and then still leave a positive review? You gotta, this is where we want to look, right? Because these are the rocks that are gonna teach us something. And so I love some of these. These are two actual reviews. And I love that they refer to brilliant service from Claire in customer relations, right? So they're on a first name basis with the customer service agent. I think that's really important. Sorted their delayed compensation. They enjoy great service. This is all from a person who had a flight delay, but who left happy because the service was great. And so, again, another interesting takeaway for almost any industry, even though customer service was at the very top of the list here of things people complained about, it can also be at the top of the list of things that people appreciate. Here's somebody who said that they were delayed on their connection, and the airline made sure that I can't tell the gender here, they and the 6-year-old kid had someplace safe to sleep and food to eat. Seems like a basic thing, right? But sometimes when you're stranded at the airport and all the restaurants are closed and it's late at night, you don't know what you're going to do. And if the airline helps you with that, man, you can take a cancellation and still turn it into a positive experience. Just curious, Noam, maybe if you have a story or an insight about something like that you've seen.
There are many. I'm trying to think of one in particular, but we've seen this type of data many times. And, it's in those delay and cancellation situations where people really feel helpless and really need assistance, that what we've seen, where our employees and industry employees in general, but and I'll be honest, a lot of times pilots who are seen sometimes as kind of behind the cockpit door, they're technical, when they are involved in the customer experience, we can turn, we've seen negative situations turn to positive, glowing reviews where people say, wow, people went way out of their way to help us out, to help me out. And it happens all the time. It happens all the time.
We're now going to start to dive even deeper. And this is what I love about the ClueTrack data, is that we can look at this so many different ways. And then with the help of ChatGPT, we can really ask some fascinating questions. So I'm guessing that you haven't seen anything cut quite like this, at least in the next couple of things that I'm going to show you. Now, one of them I would say is not surprising, which is that as we look at the difference between business class passengers and economy class, guess what, Noam? The business class passengers are happier. Is that a surprise?
It is not.
But it's interesting that on the different levels, it's interesting to see the disparity between economy and business class. And what you see is that with food and beverages and in-flight experience, it's a much higher disparity. And then I think it's interesting in terms of staff helpfulness, because I always thought you could probably give us some inside baseball here, but I'm sure that it is probably a plum job for a flight attendant to be in the higher classes as well. But at least in my experience, and I'm a very frequent flyer, I find that the vast majority of in-flight staff are polite and nice and to everybody on the plane. I haven't really ever seen that. But do any of these disparities stand out to you that would at all be surprising?
I'm a little bit surprised in the business class that the numbers, let's say for seat comfort and staff helpfulness, is not higher. Because like you said, those positions, well, the seats, I mean, I know airlines take a lot of time to create, build out the seats to really attract the kind of customers that are willing to pay a premium. And like you said, the flight attendants, the ones that are up there, tend to be the ones that are more seniors. In other words, they are choosing to be in that class of service. So it's a little bit surprising to me that the scores are not higher.
So I have a theory on this. It is not based on data. It is simply based on my own experience, but bear with me and tell me whether I'm crazy or not.
Okay.
Business class is a product, right? It's a product that airlines offer, and it is meant to be a higher up experience than economy class. But what's interesting about this product that I think differs from almost every other industry is that the product itself is not the same on every plane. So in the US, for example, if you're flying to Latin America, you're going to be on, at least in some airlines, a smaller, older plane where the business class maybe isn't that spectacular. But if you're flying to Asia, you're sitting in your own pod with a, flat back seat and, big screen TV and all this stuff. And it's like, wow, this is incredible. Right. And the interesting thing is they're both called business class, right? And so I sense that some of that why those numbers aren't as positive is, imagine a customer that started off flying business class US to Tokyo and then went US to, Mexico City. And it's a totally different experience, right? But the expectation might have been there. And I don't know what you do about that, but I've always thought that was fascinating. And I cannot think of another industry where the same product differs so much depending on what plane you get onto.
I know that there was a time that the airline, and maybe this is still the case, that airlines were looking at hotels and the way that hotels separated the brands in order to create a clear set of expectations of what you can expect depending on the brand you're in, right? So Marriott, as an example, has 30 different hotel brands under that umbrella brand. And, the expectation of the high-end brand versus the low-end brand is very distinct, so you get what you're getting what you expect. And your point is really well made, that in the airline industry, it could be you're buying a business class seat because you're thinking you're getting that, but part of your route might not be the same level of experience.
And even within a route, right? So if you're flying to Sydney from Chicago, you're probably going through LAX, and so you're on one plane from Chicago to LAX that has a business class that looks like something, and then you're on a different plane from LAX to Sydney on the long haul, and the business class is completely different, which again is interesting because sure, the long haul is going to be nicer, and that's great because it's the longer flight, but Chicago to LAX is 4 hours, and and it's just a completely different experience. So I think that's a really interesting comparison to the hotel chains, because you do know what you're going to get if you choose one of the lower end Marriott brands versus one of the higher end, and the name's right there on the side of the building, and that sets the expectation. So I think that's fascinating, and I wonder if at some point an airline or multiple airlines will figure out something similar with that.
Yeah. The other thing and this just goes to setting expectations, but one of the, again, comparing airlines to hotels, that as a passenger, you're boarding an airplane and especially on the narrow bodies, it's a little bit different on some of the wide bodies, but in the on the narrow bodies, you're walking past one class of service on the way to another class of service. Whereas in the hotel, if you're getting the, presidential suite, or if you're not in the presidential suite, you don't know anything about the presidential suite. So your setup, your level of expectation of the room you're getting is, here's the room I got, and it was great. And you're not disappointed by the fact that, I didn't get the presidential suite, which you just walked by on the airline. And that's one of the things that, back when I was in a role like that, we were looking at, is there a way, because people get disappointed when they're sitting in their coach seat and they're like, well, what about this other seat I just walked past? That seems pretty comfortable. Could I have gotten that? There's this whole expectation game that that the airlines have to that are the airlines that face that other industries don't, because you've got this separation that allows you to be satisfied with what you're getting.
Yeah, and it always breaks my heart when you see a kid come onto the plane, right? Because kids will just say whatever's on their mind, right? Hey, mommy, I want to sit here. And it's an awkward moment. And, obviously I know on some of the larger planes, there's two entrances and you actually can have a coach entrance. And maybe that does. I'd be fascinated to see if that makes a difference for people not having to walk through the first class. And then, of course, the first class people are on the plane earlier, too. So you almost feel like it's like this walk of shame that you are walking past all the people. I'd almost rather the seats be empty, right? If I'm walking past them. That's fascinating. So we also looked at the differences between men and women when it came to one particular aspect. And of course, we could go through all of the aspects, but we don't have time. But we looked at food and beverages. And I thought this was pretty interesting because there does seem to be some statistical significance here that men seem to be a lot happier with the food and beverage service than women do. I don't know why that would be. Do you have any guesses to that?
No. This is really surprising to me. I have to admit, this is surprising.
If you had asked me before I saw this slide, I would have guessed women were more satisfied. Just because I have this sense that maybe they'd be less likely to complain about it or what have you. And I don't know where I'm getting that sense, but it would have been my guess. But yes, it appears that now men are significantly more happy with the food and beverages. So, hey, we learn something new every day.
Yeah, look at that.
All right, just for our audience, I wanted to let you know that we also took a dive into what kinds of passengers were in all of this data. And not surprisingly, the bulk of it are economy class. And that makes sense because that's the bulk of people traveling. But we also had a good amount of business class in there. We asked people about whether they were traveling by themselves or as couples or as families. And that was pretty evenly distributed. So just in case you were wondering if some of these things slanted the data, we tried to get a really nice cross section. All right, Noam, you mentioned before that you fly to a lot of different places. So I thought that you would find this particularly interesting. We asked ClueTrack to look at specific routes to see if we could learn anything about where some of these things are better or worse. And so what you're looking for here is the darker red means the most complaints. So for example, in customer service, we're seeing lots of complaints in Miami and in Manchester compared to any other cities, whereas Doha seems to be doing a whole lot better. And even Dubai and Sydney are not quite as red. But as we go through some of these, I think it's really interesting because there's so much here that, again, is not even related to the airline. So, for example, boarding, right? There's not a whole lot you can do. You've got a gate; it's assigned to you. If it's a long walk to the plane from the gate, that's not really the airline's problem. It's more the airport's problem. It's almost as if we had on here that they didn't like the airport food, right? This isn't something you can control. But do you find, because I know you've flown to many different places, do you find a different kind of passenger type, or do you find that that just based on the airport itself that people are sort of feeling differently about the experience?
Well, I will say that different airports do it differently, and it makes a difference. And there's actually one airport now, LaGuardia, which was used to be among the worst customer experience airports, probably worldwide, certainly domestically in the US, and a major renovation of the terminal, but not just the terminal, everything from the traffic flow, like how cars come and pick people, drop people off, how cars come and pick people up. That whole bookend to bookend process has gotten so much better that there are articles being written about it in a lot of the major newspapers. And so I think, on the positive side, I think there are airports that have figured out how to manage flow and manage, the process of boarding. I mean, it's one of the challenges that we have as an industry is that by the time the customer gets to the airline, to your point, they've already gone through security and dropped off their bag and, had to park. I mean, they're all trying to find a parking spot in a busy airport, then go through security and all
then
these
walk
things.
a mile and a half to the gate.
Right. And it's like all this stress only to get to the gate. Now they have to stand in line, and there's a process in which, different airlines have different boarding processes. So, by number, by section or whatever, it's like you have to learn a new process. All of that builds, I think, stress. And so the question is, I mean, I think what I'm seeing here is that at least with respect to some airports, that maybe they figured that out better than some others.
Yeah, and I like what you said about New York LaGuardia. I think that shows in this data because those numbers are actually a lot better than I would expect, given what we tend to think of New Yorkers who have pretty high expectations. Let's put it that way.
Right.
But yes, I have been to the new LaGuardia, and it is absolutely night and day, incredible. And then was just recently in Newark too, and they did a whole remodel as well, which they also did a really nice job on. And so I think it'll be fascinating to see as some of these older airports get updates. You may see this data change. Every episode that we do, we like to finish with takeaways that apply to all brands. Because, we've been talking about the airline industry, and we got an expert here in the airline industry, but we know that many of you watching are not in the airline industry. So what can we learn from that industry that we can bring back to ours? The first is that customer service is likely going to be number one in most industries. As I said before, customer service is what happens when customer experience breaks. So you already know that the person has a problem before they need to talk to customer service. Thus, emotions are high, tensions are running high. It's going to be a critical aspect of your experience. Number two, airlines and other companies as well need to show empathy towards customers that are having problems, right? And whether the delays are caused by you or not, having empathy towards somebody and understanding what they're going through, understanding that it's affecting their lives in a way that transcends just getting from point A to point B is really important. And again, I think every industry could do this better. Put yourself in the customer's shoes, understand what they're going through, understand that some of this might be caused by you, some of it may not be caused by you, and that in either case, communication and empathy are really important. And number three, transparency. Transparency is absolutely critical. Noam and I talked about this. The more you can communicate, the better. I always think over communication beats under communication every day of the week, no matter what business you're in. If you're an e-commerce business and something's out of stock, you tell the customer as soon as you know it's out of stock. Don't let them wait to have to call customer service and say, "Where's my stuff?" Tell them as soon as you know, and then give them all the information that you have. We think it's going to be here next week. We're not sure when it's going to be here, but we'll update you in a week. The more communication, the better. So customer service, empathy, and communication. I think great things to take away from the airline industry. Noam, any parting thoughts either on those takeaways or just from the discussion as a whole that you'd like to share?
No, I mean, I think you've captured the essence really well. I think that's what I try to do, and I think as an industry, we've tried to do that more and more. It's been part of our education as frontline employees to recognize that those three things that you highlighted are what make the difference between a positive experience and a poor one. And then that drives loyalty, which drives the business and so on and so forth. But Yeah, no, I think that the fact that it's so universal, and the more, as you're explaining it, I'm thinking about all the other industries that I'm a consumer of, and it makes a lot of sense.
All right, so I'm going to leave you with one last question, because we don't often get people on the show that are as much on the front line as you are. I want to turn it around and ask you, what can passengers do to be better passengers? And I ask that because I think that if we were all better passengers, the experience would probably be better for everyone.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Look, I mean, I think bottom line is it goes to being, it's about relationships and about treating other people with good intentions, assuming that if something is not going the way you want, that it's not malicious, that it's, that the other person, whether it's an agent or a flight attendant or a pilot for that matter, if they're sharing information with you that is not, what you want to hear, you have to assume that, they're telling you that because that's what's required in order for the flight to operate safely, or for it to move on time, or something like that. So I think in general, assuming good intentions of other people, I think is a good way to be a better passenger. And then the rest is honestly boils down to understanding the system. I've grown up in one world, one airline system. When I travel on other airlines, I have to remind myself that it's a whole different ecosystem, and a lot of times it feels foreign. Well, why would they do it this way? I'm used to it being this other way. And so if you're a passenger who either doesn't fly frequently or flies another airline more frequently, be adaptable. Understand that there are different, two different ways or multiple different ways to have a process work. And so I would say just be adaptable.
I think that's great advice. And the last one I would add is same as one of the takeaways. Have some empathy. Understand that there are human beings that are trying to, get this big hunk of metal from one place to another safely and comfortably, and that these are tough jobs, and that they are often spending time with people who are maybe not good passengers, not polite, nasty, and, give them a break. And I think that I do think that is something that I believe got a little bit better during the pandemic. I think we just appreciate all of the people that work hard to provide an experience for us, whether it's a barista or somebody in a store or somebody flying the plane. But I would urge people that, take it, just chill out a little bit, and everything's going to be okay. And like you said, assume the good intentions that everybody is trying to get you from point A to point B. Hey, you could always drive. If you want to be in control of the whole thing, just drive, and you can avoid it. All right, Noam Alon, he is a captain of a major U.S. airline. Thank you so much for being here. It's been really fun to talk to a friend and a real expert in the industry. We appreciate your time.
It's been a pleasure, Dan. Really enjoyed it.
And thank you all for being here for another episode of CXCY. We are just getting started. We are digging into lots of different industries, finding the takeaways that can apply to your business as well. And hey, if you have an industry you'd like us to look at, maybe it's an industry that you work in, maybe it's an industry that you are just fascinated by, let us know. You can definitely connect with the folks at ClueTrack. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn or via my website, and let us know what industries you'd like us to take a look at, because we could dive into them in a future episode of CXCY. For my friends at ClueTrack, this is Dan Gingiss, the Experience Maker. We will see you next time on CXCY.